The chamber of the Galactic Council was larger than a city square. Its roof was so high it disappeared into shadows, lit only by glowing blue crystals that floated in the air like stars. The walls curved like a giant dome, covered in shifting silver light. Thousands of alien leaders sat in rows, each representing their home world. Some were giants with skin like stone, others were tiny creatures with shining eyes. Together, they looked like an ocean of colors and shapes. Usually, the council chamber was filled with loud voices, shouting, bargaining, arguing. But tonight, a strange silence hung in the air. It was not silence of peace, but silence of tension. Every leader stared at the center podium where one figure stood alone. A human. He wore no crown, no glowing armor, no robe of power. Just a simple dark suit. He looked small compared to the massive aliens around him, but his face carried a calm strength. His eyes scanned the chamber slowly, meeting the gaze of creatures far older and far stronger than his people. There was no fear in him, only patience. Behind him, in the shadow of the podium, stood another figure. He was tall, broad, and completely still. He wore no expression, spoke no word. He simply stood there, silent as stone. His presence was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Many council members tried not to look at him, but they could not help it. There was something in his stillness that made hearts beat faster. The first to speak was a counselor with silver skin and a crown of light on his head. His voice echoed like metal scraping against stone. "Human," he said with disgust, "why do you waste our time? You are nothing but children in the stars. One small planet, one small people. Why should we listen to you?" His words triggered laughter from many seats. Some aliens hissed, others roared. The sound filled the chamber, bouncing off the shining walls. It was not friendly laughter, it was sharp, mocking, cruel. The human diplomat stood firm. His hands rested calmly on the podium, his face unchanged. He did not speak, not yet. He let them laugh. But the figure behind him moved, only slightly. His head turned, his sharp gaze sweeping across the crowd. The laughter faltered for a moment, like a fire losing air. Some aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned back as if to create distance. The silence returned, heavier than before. Another leader rose, his body covered in golden scales that glittered under the crystal light. His long claws tapped against the railing as he leaned forward. "You humans speak of peace," he hissed. "Yet you build weapons. You ask for trust, yet you spread like vermin among the stars. Tell us, why should we not crush you now, before you become a disease to this galaxy?" The chamber stirred again with agreement. Voices shouted insults, calling humans thieves, liars, weaklings. Some even shouted for war. The sound grew louder and louder, until it felt like thunder rolling through the hall. The human diplomat finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, but it carried through the storm of voices. "Earth came here to live as equals," he said. "We asked for peace, but you mistake patience for weakness. You mock what you do not understand. That is dangerous." His words cut into the noise, and the crowd grew quieter. The calm tone unsettled them more than anger ever could. The golden-scaled leader slammed his claw on the railing. "Dangerous? You? One world against thousands. You are nothing." More laughter followed, but this time it was uneasy, because the figure in the shadows had taken another step forward. His boots struck the crystal floor with a heavy sound that echoed in every ear. The movement was small, but its effect was great. The air in the chamber thickened, pressing down on lungs and hearts. Beads of sweat formed on the skin of those who had never known fear before. They did not know why, but they could feel it. The figure was no ordinary guard. A young alien prince whispered nervously, "Father, what is that thing with him?" His father's face grew pale. "Do not ask," he replied quickly. "Do not even look." But the boy had already seen enough. The figure's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like embers waiting to rise into fire. The silver-skinned counselor shouted again, his voice shaking though he tried to hide it. "This meeting is over. Guards, remove the human." But the guards at the door hesitated. Their weapons shook in their hands. None of them stepped forward. Their instincts screamed at them to stay away. The human diplomat did not move. He simply raised one hand and placed it back down on the podium. His voice, quiet yet sharp, cut through the fear. "You call us weak," he said. "But weakness is not what stands before you. You wanted to see the strength of humanity. You already have." And at those words, the figure behind him took another slow step, his presence filling the chamber like a shadow spreading across the stars. The Galactic Council, rulers of countless worlds, suddenly felt very small. For the first time in centuries, fear, real fear, ruled the chamber. And deep inside, they all realized the truth. They had not just invited a human diplomat into their hall. They had invited something far more dangerous. The silence inside the Galactic Council chamber did not last long. When the human diplomat's calm words faded, the hall erupted once more. Whispers grew into shouts, and shouts into cruel laughter. Some leaders slammed their tables, mocking the humans' patience. Others hissed like snakes or screeched in high tones that echoed across the dome. For many, it was entertainment. They saw a lone human standing before them, asking for respect, and it amused them. The human diplomat did not react. His face remained calm, his eyes steady. He looked like a man used to storms. Yet behind him, the silent figure stood unmoving, his shadow stretching long across the crystal floor. The silver-skinned counselor leaned forward, his black eyes flashing with arrogance. "You humans are truly funny creatures," he sneered. "You come here with talk of peace while your world crawls in the dust. You have no fleets, you have no empire, and yet you speak as if we should fear you." The golden-scaled leader laughed loudly, showing his sharp fangs. "Perhaps the human hopes his shadow will scare us," he mocked, pointing a claw at the tall figure behind the diplomat. "Is that what you bring to our council? A bodyguard? A toy meant to frighten children?" This sparked more laughter. A group of insect-like rulers clicked their jaws rapidly, their version of cruel amusement. A giant with skin like stone let out a deep booming laugh that made the chamber tremble. But the silent figure did not move. He did not even blink. His stillness made the laughter feel strange, unnatural, as though mocking death itself. The human diplomat finally lifted his head slightly, his voice calm, almost too calm. "You laugh," he said softly, "because you do not understand. That has always been the mistake of the council. You think strength is only fleets and armies. But sometimes, strength stands quietly. And when it rises, it does not laugh." His words sent a faint shiver through the chamber, though many tried to hide it. The silver-skinned counselor slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! You dare speak to us like this? Your words are nothing but air." He gestured to the other leaders. "This human insults the council. Do you not see his arrogance?" "Yes!" shouted the golden-scaled leader. "Humans must be put in their place." Voices rose, calling for punishment, for rejection, even for invasion. The chamber had become a storm of rage and scorn, directed at one man and his silent companion. The human diplomat remained steady. He waited, letting the storm burn itself louder and louder. His silence made his enemies angrier. They wanted him to shout, to plead, to break. But he did none of that. Then something happened that froze the room. A chair from the upper rows toppled to the ground with a loud crash. One of the younger leaders, a creature with 4 glowing eyes, had fallen back in fear. He had been staring too long at the silent figure. His voice trembled as he shouted, Its eyes moved!" All heads turned. The chamber grew suddenly quieter. The tall figure in the shadows had lifted his head slightly, his glowing eyes burning faintly in the dim light. It was only a small movement, but it was enough to kill the laughter. For the first time, many leaders realized the truth. This was no simple guard. No ornament of intimidation. No powerless shadow. Whatever he was, he carried weight that pressed on every heart like a stone. The golden-scaled leader tried to recover his pride. He hissed loudly, pointing at the figure. "A trick! Nothing more. Humans bring toys to scare us because they have no real power. His claws clicked against the table as he spoke. If this thing moves again, we will destroy it here and now. The human diplomat turned his gaze toward the scaled leader. His calm expression did not change, but his words struck sharp. Be careful with threats, he said. You speak of destroying what you do not understand. But sometimes, what you do not understand is the last thing you will ever see. A cold silence followed. The laughter did not return this time. The silver-skinned counselor tried to push back against the growing fear. He leaned closer, his voice dripping with venom. You humans believe yourselves special. You think your patience is power. But your kind is reckless. Your kind is violent. If you think you can frighten this council with shadows and whispers, you are mistaken. The human diplomat gave a faint smile, not of amusement, but of warning. We did not come to frighten you, he replied. We came to remind you. Even patience has a limit. The words lingered in the air. They were not loud, but they carried weight, heavier than the chamber had ever known. Some aliens shifted nervously in their seats. Others looked at the silent figure again, and this time, they saw more than stillness. They saw a storm waiting to break. The insect-like rulers stopped clicking their jaws. The stone-skinned giant no longer laughed. Even the golden-scaled leader's claws tapped slower, his false confidence slipping. The human diplomat stood calmly, his shadow stretching long beside the silent figure. He had not raised his voice, he had not shown anger, yet already the room was changing. The council had begun the night with mockery and arrogance. But now, whispers of doubt moved among them like ghosts. Something about this human, and the dark presence at his back, was different. And deep inside, many began to wonder, had the council made a mistake by mocking him at all? The chamber of the Galactic Council still trembled with uneasy silence. Mockery had faded, replaced by whispers, doubt, and the heavy presence of the silent figure standing behind the human diplomat. No one admitted it aloud, but many felt it. Fear was creeping into the hearts of the strongest rulers in the galaxy. Then, without warning, the silence broke. A deep rumble shook the floor beneath their feet. The crystal walls quivered. For a moment, the counselors thought it was thunder. But thunder did not echo inside the most secure building in the galaxy. The rumble grew louder, then exploded into a deafening blast. The doors of the great chamber shuddered, and the lights above flickered violently. Alarm sirens wailed, red beams flashing across the dome. Attack! Someone shouted. Panic spread like fire. Through the wide glass panels of the chamber walls, flames lit the sky. Enemy ships had broken through the defense grid of the council's homeworld. Fireballs streaked downward as fighters screamed through the air, firing into the city below. The capital, thought to be untouchable, was burning. Inside the chamber, chaos erupted. Leaders shouted over one another, some demanding guards, others calling for evacuation. The sound of explosions grew closer, shaking the crystal floor with every strike. The silver-skinned counselor's face turned pale. Impossible! No one breaches these defenses, he shouted, but his voice was drowned in the panic. The golden-scaled leader roared, Get me my soldiers! Protect the council! But even as he screamed, the first explosion struck the chamber itself. The walls cracked, raining shards of glowing crystal across the hall. Guards rushed in, their weapons raised. The sound of blasters filled the air as attackers stormed through broken doors. The council's enemies, masked raiders, armored warriors from a rival empire, poured inside with deadly precision. Screams filled the chamber. Some counselors tried to flee. Others hid behind their guards. Many shouted for help, their pride vanishing in the face of death. And through all the chaos, the human diplomat did not move. He stood at the podium, calm as before, as if he had expected this moment. His eyes turned toward the silent figure behind him. For the first time that night, his hand lifted, not to beg, not to fight, but to give a signal of release. The silent figure stepped forward. The sound of his boots echoed louder than the alarms. His glowing eyes brightened, no longer faint embers but burning fire. He was not just a guard, not just a shadow. He was something else, something built for war. The nearest raiders raised their weapons and fired. Energy blasts shot across the hall, but they never reached their target. The figure moved faster than sight, a blur of steel and shadow. In an instant, he was among them. Bones cracked, metal shattered, screams echoed. What should have been a quick kill turned into a massacre. The golden-scaled leader froze in shock, his words dying in his throat. What is that thing? The human diplomat's voice was steady, calm, almost cold. That, he said, is what stands with humanity. The silent figure tore through raiders like paper. Blades struck him but broke on his armor-like skin. Blaster fire sparked harmlessly as he moved faster than their eyes could follow. He crushed weapons in his hands, hurled enemies across the chamber, and silenced screams with terrifying ease. Council members who had mocked the human only minutes ago now sat frozen, their eyes wide with terror. Some had called him weak, yet here was his companion, an unstoppable storm in human form. But the attack did not stop. More raiders stormed through the doors. Hundreds poured in, weapons blazing. The chamber shook with violence. Still, the human diplomat remained unmoved. His hands rested calmly on the podium, his gaze sharp but unafraid. His shadow, the figure, was enough. The silver-skinned counselor clutched his chair with trembling hands. This is madness, he whispered. No one should have such power. The golden-scaled leader's scales rattled as he shouted, "You brought a weapon into the council!" The human diplomat turned to him, his calm expression unbroken. "You called humanity weak. Tonight you will see the truth." The figure slammed one raider into the floor with bone-crushing force. Another he threw against the crystal wall, shattering it into pieces. He moved without pause, without mercy, every strike precise, every kill certain. The chamber that had once mocked the human now trembled under the roar of destruction. Smoke filled the air, the red glow of fire reflecting on terrified faces. The insect-like rulers clung to each other, clicking their jaws in fear. The stone-skinned giant who had laughed earlier now backed away slowly, his huge body trembling. One counselor whispered, voice shaking, "This is no guard. This is death itself." The human diplomat heard the words but said nothing. His silence was more powerful than a shout. Outside, the city burned. Inside, the council watched as their enemy raiders fell one after another. But deep inside, they began to wonder who was more dangerous, the raiders attacking them, or the human shadow that walked among them. The battle raged on. The council chamber had become a place of screams and fire. Yet the human diplomat remained calm, his figure beside him tearing through enemies without slowing. The leaders had mocked him. They had laughed at him. They had called humanity weak. But now, as the shadow struck again and again, they began to understand a truth that chilled their very souls. They were not witnessing weakness. They were witnessing a warning. The chamber shook with the echoes of battle. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. Fires burned in shattered corners, and broken crystal littered the floor. The once proud hall of the Galactic Council no longer looked like a place of power. It looked like a battlefield. The raiders had come with confidence. They had entered the chamber believing they would kill quickly and scatter the leaders like frightened animals. But they had not expected him. The silent figure who had stood behind the human diplomat now moved like a storm. He was neither soldier nor guard. He was something else. Every step he took ended with the fall of an enemy. Every swing of his hand crushed armor and bone. Blasters lit the chamber, their bolts striking him again and again, but he did not stop. The blasts sparked and vanished against his body as though he were made of something stronger than steel. When a blade pierced his chest, he grabbed it with his bare hand, snapped it in two, and cut down the attacker with his own weapon. The alien leaders who had once mocked the human now sat in frozen silence, their eyes wide with fear. The silver-skinned counselor gripped the railing before him, his hands shaking. "What is that thing?" he whispered, though no one answered. The golden-scaled leader hissed through his fangs. his pride collapsing with each passing second. "It is not human," he muttered. "It cannot be." The human diplomat finally stepped forward from the podium. His calm voice, so steady even in the chaos, filled the hall. "You wanted to see humanity's strength," he said. "Now you see it. But know this, what you see is only a fragment." His words made the chamber colder. Because if this was only a fragment, what more did humanity have hidden? The silent figure tore through another line of raiders, moving with deadly precision. But now the counselors noticed something strange. He did not move like a soldier fighting for victory. He moved like a weapon following instructions. His strikes were exact, efficient, controlled, as if every motion had been calculated long before it happened. One insect-like ruler whispered in horror, "It is not a man. It is a machine." But another, trembling, shook his head. "No, look at its eyes. That is no machine. That is something alive." The truth was more terrifying than either answer, because the figure was both. Flesh and machine, man and weapon. Humanity had built him, but something more than wires and steel burned within him. Something no alien in the chamber could name. The raiders grew desperate. They rushed in with heavy cannons, firing blasts powerful enough to melt stone. The explosions tore through the chamber, shaking the walls, but when the smoke cleared, the figure was still standing. His armor was blackened, his chest scarred, but his eyes glowed brighter than before. He raised one of the fallen cannons with his bare hands. The counselors watched in disbelief as he turned the weapon effortlessly, firing it back at the attackers. The blast ripped through the enemy ranks, scattering them like dust. Screams filled the air. The silver-skinned counselor sank back in his seat, his arrogance gone. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No world should have such a creation." The human diplomat's gaze swept across the chamber, meeting the eyes of every leader who had laughed at him before. His voice was calm, but every word struck like thunder. "You thought humanity weak. You called us children. But children do not build weapons like this. Children do not tame death itself." The golden-scaled leader slammed his claws on the table, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "You dare bring such a monster into our chamber? This is a violation of every law." The human diplomat turned his head slightly, his eyes cold. "Laws?" he said. "You mock us, threaten us, plot our destruction, and speak of laws? No. Tonight you learn, humans do not come unprepared." The figure moved again, faster than sight. He leapt across the chamber, crashing into the last wave of raiders with terrifying force. Bodies fell, weapons shattered, the sound of destruction ringing like drums of war. And then, as suddenly as it began, the battle ended. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of fires. The chamber was a graveyard of shattered weapons and broken enemies. Smoke hung heavy, glowing red in the firelight. The silent figure stood in the center of it all, his chest rising and falling slowly. His glowing eyes dimmed to embers again, but the weight of his presence still pressed on every soul in the room. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. Finally, the human diplomat walked down from the podium, his footsteps steady. He stopped beside the figure and placed a calm hand on his arm. "Enough," he said softly. The figure froze, then stepped back into stillness once more. The counselors stared in horror. They realized then that the weapon did not act on its own. It acted because the human commanded it. It was not the figure they feared most. It was the man who controlled him. The diplomat turned to face them all, his calm voice carrying through the smoke. "This is humanity's message," he said. "We do not come to beg. We do not come to bow. We come to stand as equals. If you will not give us peace, then you will learn what follows war with us." His words echoed through the ruined chamber, and though no one spoke back, every leader understood the truth. Humanity had brought a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And this was only the beginning. The council chamber was no longer a hall of power. It was a battlefield filled with smoke, broken glass, and the bodies of those foolish enough to challenge the silent figure. The flames reflected on the crystal walls, and the once glorious dome looked like a tomb. The human diplomat stood calmly at the center, untouched by the chaos. His shadow, the figure, remained at his side, silent again, glowing eyes dimmed like embers waiting to ignite. But every alien in the room could still feel the weight of his presence pressing against their chests. For the first time in centuries, fear had settled into the hearts of the Galactic Council. The silver-skinned counselor, who only an hour earlier had mocked the human as weak, now trembled visibly. His voice cracked as he whispered, This is impossible. How can one being destroy so many?" The golden-scaled leader hissed from his seat, his claws digging into the table. He tried to sound strong, but his words shook with fear. "No creature should have such power. This is not war, it is slaughter." The human diplomat turned his gaze toward them. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a sharpness that cut deeper than any blade. "Slaughter is what happens when arrogance blinds wisdom," he said softly. "You mocked humanity. You planned to crush us. Tonight, you see why that was a mistake." The words rippled through the chamber like a cold wind. No one laughed this time. No one mocked. Even the insect-like rulers, who had once clicked their jaws in amusement, now sat frozen, their mandibles trembling in fear. But the terror did not stay within the chamber walls. Across the city outside, alarms continued to wail. Explosions flashed in the sky as raider ships burned and fell. News channels transmitted the battle live, showing the entire galaxy what was happening inside the Council's own heart. Billions of beings across distant worlds watched as the weak humans stood unbroken while enemies fell like shadows before their weapon. Whispers began to spread through the stars. On mining worlds, slaves huddled together and spoke in awe. Humans are not weak. They are stronger than the Council. On war fronts, soldiers whispered to each other, their voices shaking. If this is their guard, what are their armies like? Even merchants and farmers far from the battle repeated the story like a legend being born. A single human shadow destroyed what no army could stop. The fear grew faster than fire. Inside the chamber, some leaders tried to recover their pride. A tall being with wings of glassy feathers stood, his voice trembling but loud. "This is a crime. You bring a weapon into the sacred hall of the Council. Humanity has broken every law of peace." The human diplomat looked at him calmly. "Peace," he said. "You laugh at the word. You spit on it. You wanted war. Tonight you see what war with us looks like." The winged leader sat down slowly, his wings folding tight in fear. The golden-scaled leader tried once more to gather courage. He rose from his seat, pointing a trembling claw at the human. "This is a trick. A single machine cannot defeat the galaxy. You will fall. Humanity will fall." The diplomat gave a faint, cold smile. "If this is only a machine, why do you tremble?" The leader's claws stopped shaking, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He was afraid. They all were. The silent figure moved again, only a single step forward. But that step was enough. The chamber froze. Not one voice dared to rise. Even the guards, who had once rushed in bravely, now kept their distance, their weapons lowered. A young alien prince whispered to his father. "It is like death itself walks beside him." The father nodded slowly, sweat on his brow. "No worse. Death takes quickly. This one waits. And waiting is more terrifying." The human diplomat placed his hands calmly behind his back, his voice echoing softly through the smoke-filled chamber. "Remember this night," he said. "Remember it when you think of Earth. You will not forget." His words were not shouted, but they carried through every ear, as though the chamber itself obeyed him. One by one, the leaders lowered their eyes. Their arrogance was gone. Their pride was broken. And in its place lived a new feeling, fear, deep and unforgettable. But outside the chamber, the terror grew even faster. Across the galaxy, rulers and generals received reports of what had happened. Some panicked, others ordered spies to gather every piece of information on humanity. The whispers had already become a storm. Humans are not weak. Humans are dangerous. The council had laughed at them. Tonight no one laughed. The human diplomat turned slowly, motioning to his companion. The figure stepped back into the shadows, his eyes fading once more. Together, they began to walk toward the broken doors. No one tried to stop them. No one even breathed loudly. And as they left, the chamber that had once mocked humanity sat frozen in silence. The strongest rulers in the galaxy had been humbled not by an army, not by a fleet, but by one human and the shadow beside him. The terror had spread, and it would not stop spreading. The council chamber was silent. The fires burned low, the smoke curled slowly upward, and the floor was littered with broken weapons. The raiders who had stormed in only minutes ago were gone, defeated, broken, or dead. Yet the fear in the air was thicker than the smoke itself. The leaders of the Galactic Council sat frozen in their seats. Their proud voices were gone. The mocking laughter that had once filled the hall was dead. Only wide eyes and trembling hands remained. At the center of it all stood the human diplomat. His suit was simple, his voice calm, and yet every alien in the chamber now looked at him as though he were the most dangerous man alive. And behind him, the silent figure stood once more in stillness, glowing eyes dim but heavy with threat. The diplomat took a slow breath. Then he stepped forward, each footstep echoing across the ruined chamber. He stopped at the very center where all could see him clearly. His voice, soft but sharp, cut through the heavy silence. "You thought of Earth as weak," he said. "You called us children, unworthy of your respect. Tonight, you saw the price of such arrogance." The silver-skinned counselor, his voice now broken, whispered, You brought a weapon into the council. No one has ever done this. No world dares to do this." The human turned his eyes on him, steady and cold. "And yet I did," he replied. "Because humanity does not come to beg. We do not kneel. We came here to speak of peace. You chose to mock us. You chose to threaten us. And so I brought you a lesson." His words struck like thunder, though he never raised his voice. The leaders shifted uneasily, their pride cracking under the weight of his calm strength. The golden-scaled leader slammed a claw against the table, his last attempt to recover pride. This is intimidation. You cannot force the council to bow with fear." The diplomat's eyes locked on him. "Force?" he asked softly. "No, this is not force. This is a warning. Humanity does not seek war. But if you bring it to us, then you will see what true war looks like. And you will not survive it." The chamber grew colder. The words echoed, heavy, final. Some counselors glanced nervously at each other. Whispers began to move among them, low and fearful. They had always thought humans were scattered, weak, and small. But if this man spoke truth, if this weapon was only a fragment of their power, then war with Earth would not be victory, it would be suicide. The diplomat continued, his voice steady. "Tonight, you learned that patience has limits. We extended our hand for peace, but you slapped it away. You laughed at us. You threatened our world. That ends now. Humanity will not bow to arrogance. If you seek war, know this, our shadow will fall upon your fleets, and when it does, your empires will burn." The words sank deep into every soul present. None doubted him now. The silent figure shifted slightly behind him, and the room froze. Even the sound of breathing seemed dangerous. Every council member felt the weight of death standing only a few steps away. The insect-like rulers lowered their mandibles, their eyes wide with terror. The stone-skinned giant who once laughed now sat hunched, his massive frame trembling. Even the silver-skinned counselor, once arrogant, lowered his head. The human diplomat let the silence stretch. He wanted them to feel it, to remember it. Then, slowly, he delivered his ultimatum. Choose wisely. Make peace with Earth, or prepare for your downfall. There will be no second warning. His voice was not angry, but the calmness was worse than rage. It was the calm of someone who knew he held the power to destroy, and would do so without hesitation if forced. One by one, the leaders began to look down at their tables, unable to meet his gaze. They did not answer him. They did not challenge him. Their silence was their surrender. The diplomat took another slow breath, then turned his back on them. The silent figure followed, his glowing eyes sweeping across the chamber one last time. Not a single guard or leader dared to move against them. As they walked toward the shattered doors, the human stopped briefly. Without looking back, he spoke again. Remember this night. Let it guide your choices. Humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive mockery. And humanity never walks alone. Then he stepped forward, his companions' heavy footsteps behind him. The chamber remained frozen long after they had gone. Smoke still hung in the air, and fire still burned, but no one dared move or speak. The strongest rulers in the galaxy sat broken, haunted by the calm warning of a single human diplomat and the silent weapon at his side. And though no one said it aloud, they all felt the same truth. The galaxy had changed tonight, forever. The ruined council chamber stood in silence long after the human diplomat spoke his last words. Smoke still hung heavy, glowing faintly in the red light of broken crystals. The air was thick with the smell of fire, metal, and fear. No one spoke. No one dared. The human turned from the center of the hall, his steps calm and steady, as though he were leaving an ordinary meeting. Behind him, the silent figure followed, tall, unshaken, glowing eyes dim but watchful. Together they walked toward the shattered doors, and with every step, the weight of their presence pressed harder on those left behind. No one tried to stop them. Not a single guard moved. Not a single counselor spoke. These were the rulers of empires, masters of armies, voices that had commanded galaxies for centuries. Now they sat frozen, reduced to frightened shadows in their own hall. The silver-skinned counselor lowered his head into his hands, his pride gone. The golden-scaled leader, once so loud, sat stiff with fear, claws trembling against the table. The stone-skinned giant who had laughed at the human now looked small, his great frame hunched and silent. The human diplomat walked through the smoke without looking back. The tall figure's glowing eyes swept over the chamber one last time, and everywhere they passed, leaders flinched and turned away. None could meet that gaze. It was not the look of a soldier. It was the look of death waiting for a command. The sound of their boots on broken crystal echoed in the silence. Step after step, closer to the exit, closer to the freedom of the city outside. Then, just before leaving, the human paused. He did not turn around. His voice carried softly, but it reached every ear in the chamber. Tonight you learned fear, he said. Carry it with you. It will remind you of the line you must never cross. The words settled like chains on their hearts. The message was clear. Mock humanity again, and they would face destruction. The diplomat continued forward, and the great doors opened with a deep groan. Outside, the night sky still burned with fire. Enemy ships, the ones that had dared to strike the council's world, now fell like meteors. Pieces of metal streaked across the heavens, crashing into the ground below. The city that had once seemed untouchable was scarred, but it still stood. Crowds had gathered outside the chamber. Citizens, soldiers, workers. They all stared in silence as the human and his shadow emerged. They had heard the stories. Some had seen the battle through their own eyes. Whispers ran through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. That's him. The human. No, not just a human. Something else walks with him. The diplomat walked calmly through the crowd, his shadow following. The people parted quickly, making way without being told. No one wanted to be near the glowing-eyed figure. Fear moved them faster than orders ever could. But it was not only fear. There was awe as well. For the first time, many aliens looked at a human not with mockery but with respect. Respect born from terror, but respect nonetheless. Above, drones recorded everything. The images spread across the stars faster than light could travel. Billions of beings on distant worlds watched the human walk from the chamber, his shadow beside him. The story had already taken form. One human stood against the galaxy, and the galaxy trembled. Inside the council chamber, the rulers slowly began to stir. The silver-skinned counselor leaned close to the golden-scaled leader, his voice low and broken. "We cannot fight them. Not like this." The golden-scaled leader, his pride shattered, gave no reply. He only stared at the broken doors, the memory of glowing eyes burning in his mind. The stone-skinned giant spoke softly to no one in particular. "They came for peace, and we laughed. We may have just awakened something far worse than war." Fear spread through the chamber again, but this time it was quiet, heavy, and lasting. Every leader there knew the same truth: humanity had crossed a line into legend. Far above, in the orbiting stations, officers and generals who had once dismissed Earth now spoke in hushed voices. "We cannot afford their anger," one whispered. "If one shadow can do this, what would happen if Earth sent many?" Across the galaxy, rulers and warlords received the reports. Some panicked, others prepared fleets, but all felt the same dread. War with humanity was no longer unthinkable. It was suicidal. The human diplomat walked on, his shadow silent at his side. They left the city behind, stepping into the dark sky of the stars. For a moment, it seemed as though the galaxy itself held its breath, watching them go. And when they were gone, when the sound of their boots faded into silence, the council chamber remained broken and trembling. The leaders who had once claimed to be the masters of the galaxy now sat in fear of a single world. That night became a story whispered on every world. Some called it a curse, others called it a prophecy, but all agreed on one truth: humanity was not weak. Humanity was not to be mocked. Humanity carried shadows more dangerous than death itself. And though the human diplomat had left in silence, the galaxy knew the truth. This was not the end. It was only the beginning.